was upsetting for all of us, because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently, he had had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he had not taken his medication and had suffered one out on the trail. Before you ask, I have no idea why he thought it was okay to go out alone, or why she didn't go with him. I don't ask about that kind of thing because, past a certain point, it really doesn't matter. Someone is missing, and it's my job to find them. We went out and standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our vets found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out the fan to make sure we were covering as much ground as possible. Suddenly, a call comes over the radio, telling us to all because this usually means the missing person is injured, and we need a full team to help them get out safely. We meet back up, and the vet is just standing at the base.
You guys having a killer
with
time?
his hands on the side of his head. I ask my buddy what's going on, and he points up into the branches of this tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. But there's a walking stick dangling from a branch at least 30 feet off the ground. The little strap thing on the handle had been looped around the branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up into the air that far, and we don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We call him to the tree, but it's obvious no one's in it. We're all just sort of left scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, but they lose his scent long before this tree. Eventually, the search is called off because there are other calls we have to attend to, and past a certain point, there's not much we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for months, asking if we found her husband, and it was heartbreaking to hear her get more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call in particular was so upsetting, but I think it was just the sheer improbability of it. That, and the questions that we made. How the hell did this guy's cane end up in a tree? Did someone kill him and toss that up there as some sort of weird trophy? We did our best to find him, but it was almost like a target. We still talk about that one from time to time. Missing kids are the most heartbreaking. It doesn't matter what circumstances they are. It's never easy, and we always dread the ones we find deceased. It's not common. David Pilates talks about kids finding in places that I can honestly say I've heard about this kind of thing happening more than I've share one of the ones that I witnessed personally. A mother and her 3 kids went out for a picnic in an area of the park that has a small lake. One is 6, one is 5, and the other is about 3 years old. And according to her, she never lets them out of sight at any given time. She never saw anyone else in the area either, which is important.
Oh God.
She packs their stuff up and they start to head back to the parking area. Now, this lake is only about 2 miles into the woods, and it's on a very clearly established trail. It's almost impossible to get lost getting from the parking area to the lake, unless you're deliberately going off the path like an imbecile. Her kids are walking in front of her when she hears what sounds like someone coming up the path behind her. She turns around, and in the 4 or so seconds that she's not looking, her 5-year-old son vanishes.
Looks like a medieval warrior.
She figures he'd step off the trail to pee or something. and she asks her other two where he went. They both tell her that a big man with a scary face came out of the woods next to them, took the kid's hand, and led him into the trees. The two remaining kids don't seem upset. In fact, she later says that it seems like they'd been drugged. They're sort of spacey and fuzzy. So, of course, she freaks out.
But my lips hurt real bad.
Kid.
I don't feel very good.
She's screaming his name.
I don't feel very
she
good.
Says at one point, she thinks she
don't feel very good.
Now,
I don't
obviously,
feel very good.
she can't go blindly running into the woods.
I don't feel very good.
She's got two other kids.
I don't feel very good.
So she calls the police, and they
But
send
my
us
lips
out
hurt real
immediately.
bad.
Let's start the search for him.
I don't feel very good.
Over the course of the search,
I don't feel very good.
we never find a single
Lips hurt real bad.
We don't find any clothing, or broken bushes, or literally anything. Of course, there's suspicion about the mother for a while, but it's pretty clear that she's completely destroyed by the whole
But my
thing.
lips hurt real bad.
We look for this kid for weeks. The search peters out, and we have to move on. The volunteers keep searching, and one day we get a call on the radio that a body has been found and needs to be recovered. They tell us the location, and none of us can believe it. We figured it had to be a different kid, but we go out there, about 15 miles from the site where he vanished. We find the body of the kid we've been looking for. I have been trying to figure out how this kid got where he did ever since he was born, but I've never come up with an answer. A volunteer just happened to be in the area, because he figured he might as well look in places that no one else would think to, on the off chance the body had been dumped. He comes to the base of a tall, rocky slope, and he looks through his binoculars.
I don't feel very good. I don't feel very good. I don't feel very good.
This is the color of the shirt. Calls it in. It took us almost an hour to get his body down, and none of us could believe it. Not only was this kid 15 miles from where he'd started, there was no possible way he could have gotten up there on his own. This slope is treacherous, and it's hard for even us with our climbing gear on.
But my lips hurt real
A
bad.
5-year-old boy had no
my
way
lips
of
hurt real
getting up
bad.
there. It's impossible.
Such an idiot.
Of that I'm certain.
But my lips
Not
hurt real
only
bad.
that, but the kid
But my
doesn't
lips
even
hurt real
have a
bad.
scratch on him.
But my
His
lips
shoes
hurt
are
real
gone,
bad.
but his feet aren't
You guys are
damaged.
retarded.
So it wasn't as if
You guys are
animals
retarded.
hurt him up there.
You guys are
From what we can
retarded.
tell, he hasn't been
You guys are
dead that long.
retarded.
He'd been out there for over a month by that point, and it looked like he'd only been dead for, at most, a day or two. The whole thing was unbelievably strange, and was one of the most disturbing calls I'd ever been on. We found out later that the coroner determined the child had died from exposure.
Oh, God.
He'd frozen to death, probably late at night, 2 days before we found him. There were no suspects. There were no answers. To date, it's one of the weirdest things I have ever seen. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been last seen at. The kid wasn't even keep them company. As my trainer and I headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people.
I don't
It's a
feel
natural
very
dip
good.
in the land near a popular trail.
I don't feel very
I
good.
usually move downhill because it's easier.
I don't feel very good.
It's a few miles away, and we get there in about a half hour.
You guys are retarded.
As we're I see something in the distance. Now, this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there is back roads you can take
my lips hurt real bad.
if you don't want to hike in that far.
But my lips hurt real bad.
But we're on state-protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or makeshift shelter that people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges, and if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I pointed out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase in the middle of the woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a staircase with beige carpet and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house, where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously, and I could see the wood it's made out of. It's almost like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely, and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there, and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually looking at it, as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I ask her what this is doing here, and she just chuckles. Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them. I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm, hard. I wouldn't do that, she said. Her voice so casual, but her grip is tight. And I stand there looking at her. You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them. Do not touch them, do not go up them. Just ignore them. I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best if I don't.
But my lips hurt real bad.
We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right, though. I'd say about every 5th call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30, 40 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest searches of training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for miles. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion, and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did.
I don't feel very good.
It's normal. Don't worry about it.
You guys are retarded.
But don't go close to them, or idiot. When trainees ask me about it, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping that someday I do get a better answer, but it has not happened yet. This is another one that was less spooky and more sad. A young man went missing late in winter, when realistically no one should be going that far out into the trails. We close a lot of them, but some remain open year-round, unless there's a shitload of snow. We did an operation for him, and we had about 6 feet of snow on the ground since it was unusually heavy snow this year.
You guys are
likely that we'd find him until spring, when the thaw came. Sure enough, when the first big thaw came, a hiker reported a body a little ways off the main trail. We found him at the base of a tree in a pile of melted snow.
You guys are
I
retarded.
knew right away what had happened, and it scared the living
You guys are
out of me.
retarded.
Most of you who ski or snowboard or spend any time on the mountain will probably have guessed too. When snow falls, it doesn't collect as thick in the areas beneath the branches.
Idiot.
It happens with most
I don't
fruit
feel very good.
because they have a sort of closed umbrella shape. So what you end up with is space around the base of the tree that's filled with a mixture of loose, powdery snow, air, and branches. They're called tree wells, and they're not immediately obvious if you don't know what you're looking for. We've put up signs in the Welcome Center, big ones, letting people know how dangerous they are. But every year that we get a snow, at least one
But my lips hurt real bad.
Or doesn't take the warning seriously, and we find out about it in the spring. My best guess is that this young man was hiking and got tired, or maybe a cramp from walking.
But my lips hurt real bad.
He went to go sit at the base of the tree, not knowing that there was a tree well, and fell in. He got stuck with his feet up, and the surrounding snow caved in around him. Unable to free himself, he suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it doesn't usually happen except in really deep snow. But if you get stuck in a weird position, like this guy did, even 6 feet of snow can be lethal. What scared me the most was imagining how he must have struggled, upside down in the freezing cold. He didn't die quickly.
But my lips hurt real
The snow
bad.
would have formed a dense, heavy pile on top of him, and it would have been literally impossible to get out. As it got harder to breathe, he would have known what was happening. I can't even imagine what he was thinking in his last moments. A lot of my outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen the Goat Man while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that.
Idiot.
I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had some kind of similar thing happen. I'm not willing to chalk it up to the Goat Man. We'd gotten a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down to an area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband is just beside himself. He runs, well, I guess more jogs to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail, looking at something, when his wife starts screaming behind him. He runs back to her, and she's passed out on the trail. We get her on back, and as we're getting her down the Welcome Center, she comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially what happened was this. She'd been waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming
Don't
closer.
feel very good.
She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part, because it was so weird that I don't think I could
feel very good.
if I tried. It wasn't a cat, it was a man, saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that did. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him. And the closer he got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I fainted. Now, obviously, I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the middle of the
But my lips
woods
hurt real
chanting
bad.
meow at people. So once we get down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm going to go search the area to see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she
Don't
fainted.
feel very
I
good.
don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more, and when I head back, I go off the trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop, and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound did not come closer or even get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying meow, meow, in this really odd monotone. As comical as it makes it sound, it was almost like that guy in South Park with the electromagnets. Ned.
You guys are retarded!
I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out, and I ended up going back.
You guys are retarded!
I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there messing with people, but even I have to admit that it was weird.
Such an idiot!
So, this kind of turned into a massive wall of text, and for that I apologize. I wanted to get the stories that my friend told me, and he does have some good ones, so I'll be sharing those with you guys soon. I also have a few more in my
I don't feel very good.
I hope you all enjoyed part 1 of these terrifying search and rescue stories. Keep a lookout for part 2 coming.
I don't feel very good.
In the meantime, if you enjoy my content, like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll be seeing you all very soon.
I don't feel very good. I don't feel very good.
Well, once again, you guys have blown me away with your staggering amount of responses to my stories. There's no way I can respond to each of you individually, so I'm just going to address some common things again, and then move on with the stories.
But my lips hurt
I'm
real
going to
bad.
write as many as I can think of, in addition to my friends' stories, and I will probably not update again until I get a chance to answer some questions. Alright, so the common questions I found you all
I don't
had.
feel very good.
I am not comfortable talking about exactly where I work, unfortunately. In all reality, some of the things I mentioned here could get me in a lot of trouble, or even fired, so it's best if I just don't discuss too much. I will say that I am in the United States, and in an area that is comprised of a great deal of wilderness. We're talking hundreds of miles of thick forest with a mountain
But my lips hurt real
and a few
bad.
lakes. There is still a great amount of interest in the stairs.
Gross!
And luckily for you guys, my friend has a story that I think you'll all be very interested in. I'll go into that more at the end of this update. As for whether or not I have ever thought of asking my superiors about them, I have, but again, I don't want to risk my job. However, one of my former superiors no longer works as a search and rescue officer, and it's possible that he may be willing to talk to me about it. I'll be speaking to him later in the week, and will let you all know what comes of that. As far as advice on becoming an SAR officer goes, I think the best advice I can give is to contact your local Forest Service office and see if they offer any training courses, or what the qualifications are. I've been doing this for years, and I started out as a volunteer helping on search and rescue operations. It's a great job, despite the occasional tragic situations, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. Alright, finally, let's move on to some stories. The first thing that happened on a case that I went out right after I got out of training, and was still pretty new to everything. Before I took this job, I was a volunteer, so I had a basic idea of what to expect. But on those calls, you're mostly dealing with finding lost people after vets have found signs of them. As a search and rescue officer, you go out for all kinds of cases, from animal bites to heart attacks. This case got called in early in the morning from a young couple who were up on one of the trails that goes by the lake. The husband was completely hysterical, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. We could hear the woman screaming in the background, and he was begging us to come up the right way. When we got there, we seen him holding his wife, and she's got something in her arms. She's screaming these awful, almost animal-like screams, and he's sobbing. He sees us and he screams at us to help them, to please get an ambulance up there. Now obviously, we can't just drive an ambulance up the walking path, so we ask if his wife needs help, or if she can walk on her own. He's still hysterical, but he manages to tell us that it's not his wife that needs help. I go over while one of the vets tries to calm him down, and I ask the wife what's going on. She's rocking, holding something, and just shrieking over and over. I crouch down and see that whatever she's holding, it's covering her with blood. That's when I notice the sling on her front, and my heart sinks. I ask her to tell me what's going on, and I sort of pry her arms gently open so I could see what she's holding. It's her baby, obviously dead. His head is caved in on one side, and he's covered in scratches. Now, I've seen dead bodies before, but something about this whole situation hits me hard. I have to take a second to compose myself, and I get up and go get one of the other vets who were standing by. I tell him that it's a dead kid, and he sort of pats my shoulder and tells me he'll deal with it. It took us over an hour to get this woman to let us see her kid. Every time we try to take him from her, she just flips out and tells us we can't have him, that he'll be okay if we just leave her alone and let her help him. But eventually, one of the vets manages to calm her down, and she gives us the body. We took it back to the med area, but when the EMT showed up, they told us that there was never any hope of saving the child. He died instantly from the trauma to his head. I was good buddies with one of the nurses who met them at the hospital. She told me later on what had happened. Turns out the couple had been walking with the baby in the sling, and they stopped because the kid was fussing. The dad takes the kid and is holding him, looking out over this little gully by the path. The mom comes to stand next to him, but she ends up stepping on a loose patch of soil, and she trips. She falls into the dad, who drops the kid, who ends up falling about 20 feet down this little gully onto the rocks at the very bottom. The dad climbed down and recovered the kid, but he'd fallen right on his head, and was dead by the time he got there. The baby was only about 15 months old. It was a total freak accident, a series of events that all compiled into the worst possible outcome. Probably one of the more awful calls I've been on. I haven't seen a whole lot of animal bites in my time as a search and rescue officer, mostly because there aren't that many animals that come around the area. While there are bears in the area, they tend to stay pretty far away from people, and sightings are highly unusual. Most of the animals you'll see are small ones, like coyotes, raccoons, and skunks. What we do see frequently, though, are moose, and let me tell you, moose are nasty. They'll chase after anything, for any reason, and God help you if you get in between a female and its baby. One of the more amusing calls was a guy who got chased down by an absolutely massive male moose, and was stuck in a tree. Took us almost an hour to get him down, and when he was finally on solid ground again, he looks at me and says, "Damn, them fuckers is big up close." I guess that's not really scary, but it's still that far. I honestly don't know how I've forgotten this story, but it is by far the scariest thing that's happened. I guess maybe I tried so well to forget about it, but it just didn't happen. As someone who spends literally all their time in the woods, you don't ever want to let yourself get scared or out of your head. That's why when you have experiences like this, you tend to just forget about it and move on. This is, to date, the only thing that's ever made me really seriously consider if this job is the right one. I don't really like talking about it. It doesn't work! I recall, this took place right after the spring. It was a typical lost child call. A 4-year-old little girl wandered away from her family's campsite and had been missing for about 2 hours. was partly from one of your buddies. We were sort of casually holding conversation. I know it sounds callous, but you do sort of get the sense of it when you've done this like that. It just becomes the norm. And I think to a certain extent, you have to learn to be sensitive to yourself in order to get this job. We searched for a good 2 hours, going well beyond where we think it should be, and we come out of a small valley, and something makes us both stop and move. We freeze and look at each other, and there's almost a sensation like a plane being pressurized. My ears pop at the now this odd sensation of having dropped our feet. I start to ask my buddy if he felt it, but before I can, we hear the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. It's almost like a freight train passing directly behind us, but it's coming from every direction at once, including our guard down below us. He's screaming something to me, but I can't hear him over the deafening noise. Understandably freaked out, we look all around us, trying to find the source of the sound, but neither of us sees anything. Of course, my first thought is on the inside, but we're not near enough cliffs, and even if we were, it would have hit us by now. The sound goes on, and we're trying to yell at each other, but even standing close together, we can't hear anything but this sound. Then suddenly, as it starts, it stops, like someone threw a switch and we cut it off. We stand there for a second, perfectly still, and slowly the normal sounds of the woods come back. He asks me what the hell just happened, but I just kind of shrug and stand there looking at each other. I get on the radio and ask if anyone else was heard in another world, but no one hears it, even though we're all within shouting distance of each other. My buddy and I just sort of shrug it off and keep going. About an hour later, we all check up on the radios, and no one has found the little girl. Most of the time, we won't search when it gets dark, but because we don't have any kind of lead on her, a few of us decide to keep going, including me and my buddy. We keep close together and we're calling out for her every couple of minutes. At this point, I'm hoping beyond hope that we find her, because while I may not like kids, the idea of them being out all alone in the dark is awful. The woods can be intimidating to kids in the daylight. At night, well, it's a whole different beast. But we're not seeing any signs of her or getting any responses. And around midnight, we decide to turn around and head back to the rendezvous point. We're about halfway back when my buddy stops and shines his light right in front of us into a really thick deadfall, a group of dead trees. I ask him if he's heard a response, but he just told me to be quiet a second and listen. I do, and in the distance, I could hear what sounded like a kid crying. We both call the girl's name and listen for any kind of response.
Idiot!
But it's just this really faint crying.
Gross!
We head in the direction of this deadfall and go around it, calling her name over and over. As we get closer to the crying, I start getting this weird feeling in my gut, and I tell my buddy that something isn't right. He tells me he feels the same way, but we can't figure out what it is. We stop where we are and call the girl's name again, and at the same time, we both figure it out.
Gross!
The crying is on loop. It's the same little pitching sob, then wail, then quiet hiccup, repeated over and over. It's exactly the same every time, and without saying another word, we both take off running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that, but something about it was so incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back to the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard of anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sounds sort of anticlimactic, but the call effed me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her, and all the other people we've never found, but frankly, I doubt we'll ever find anything. Of the missing persons calls I've gone out on, only a handful have ever resulted in a complete disappearance, meaning no trace of the person and nobody ever found. But sometimes, finding a body just leads to more questions than answers. Here are some of the bodies we've found that have become infamous in our team. Number 1. A teenage boy whose remains were recovered almost a year after he vanished. We found the top of his skull, 2 finger bones, and his camera almost 40 miles from where he was last seen. The camera, sadly, was destroyed. Number 2. The pelvis of an older man who had vanished a month earlier. That was all we found. Number 3. The lower jaw and right foot of a 2-year-old boy on the highest. Number 4. The body of a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome, almost 20 miles away from where she vanished. She had died of exposure 3 weeks after going missing, and all of her clothes were intact except for her shoes and jacket. There were berries. The coroner said it appeared as if suspects ever identified. The frozen body of a 1-year-old baby found a week after vanishing in the hollow of a tree, 10 miles from the area he was last seen. There was fresh milk found in his stomach, but his tongue, a single vertebrae, and a 3-year-old girl, found in the snow almost 10 miles from the Now on to a couple of other stories my friend told me. I mentioned that you all were interested in the stairs, and you're in luck. He's had a closer encounter with them, though he doesn't have any real explanation for it. He does. My buddy has been a search and rescue officer for about 7 years. He started when he was a junior in college, and he had a very similar experience when he first encountered which was to never go near, touch, or ascend them. For the first year, he did just that, but apparently his curiosity got the better of him, and on one call, he broke away from the line and went to go check out a set of them. He said they were about 10 miles from the path where a teenage girl had vanished, and the dogs were following the scent. He was on his own, lagging behind the main group, when he saw a set of stairs off to his left. They looked like they were from a new house, because the carpeting was pristine. He said that as he got closer, he didn't feel any different, or hear any weird noises. He was expecting something to happen, like bleeding from his ears or collapsing, but he got right up next to them and didn't feel anything. The only thing, he said, that was odd was that there was absolutely no debris on the steps, no dirt, leaves, rust, anything, and there didn't appear to be any signs of animals or insect activity in the immediate area, which he found strange. It was like things were avoiding them, and more like they had just happened to be in a relatively barren part of the forest. He touched the stairs and didn't feel anything except that sort of sticky feeling you get from new carpet. Making sure his radio was on, he slowly ascended the stairs. He said it was scary because the way they'd been stigmatized, he wasn't really sure what was going to happen. He joked that half of him expected to be teleported to some other dimension, and the other half was watching for a UFO to come swooping down. But he got to the top with little event, and he stood there looking around. But he said the longer he stood on the top step, the more he felt like he was doing something very, very wrong. He described it as the feeling you'd get if you were in a part of the government building you had no business being in, as if someone was going to come and arrest you, or shoot you in the back of the head at any second. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling only got stronger and stronger, and that's when he realized that he couldn't hear anything anymore. The sounds of the forest were gone, and he couldn't even hear his own breathing. It was like some kind of weird, awful tinnitus, but more oppressive. He climbed back down and rejoined the search, and didn't mention what he'd done. But, he said, the weirdest part came after. His trainer was waiting back at the welcome center after the search ended for the day, and he cornered my buddy before he could leave. He said his trainer had this look of intense anger and asked what was wrong. "You went up them, didn't you?" My buddy said it wasn't phrased as a question. He asked how his trainer knew. The trainer just shook his head. "Because we didn't find her. The dogs lost her scent." My buddy asked what that had to do with anything. The trainer asked how long he'd been on the stairs, and my buddy said no more than a minute. The trainer gave him this really awful, almost dead-eyed look, and told him that if he'd ever went up another set of stairs, he'd be fired immediately. The trainer walked away, and I guess he's never answered any of the questions my buddy asked him about it since. My buddy has been involved in a lot of missing persons cases where there's never been a trace of him found. I mentioned David Paulides, and my buddy said that he can confirm that those stories are, for the most part, accurate. He said that most of the time, if the person is not found right away, they're either never found, or they're found weeks, months, or even years later, in places they can't have possibly ever gotten to. One story he told me that was really standing out was it involved a 5-year-old boy with a severe mental disability. The little boy vanished from a picnic area in the late fall. In addition to the disability, he was also physically handicapped, and his parents explained over and over that he simply could not have vanished. It was impossible. Someone had to have taken him. My buddy said they searched for this kid for weeks, going miles out of the accepted range, but it was like he'd never been there. The dogs could not pick up his scent anywhere, not even in the picnic area where he'd apparently vanished from. Suspicion fell on the parents, but it was pretty clear that they were devastated and hadn't done anything sinister to their child. The search was concluded about a month later, and my buddy said everyone had pretty much forgotten it by later in the winter. He was out on a training op in the snow, on one of the higher peaks, when he came across something in the snow. He said he saw it from far away at first, and when he got closer, he realized it was a shirt, frozen and sticking partway out of the powder. He recognized it as belonging to the kid, because it had a distinctive pattern. About 20 yards away, he found the child's body, lying partially buried in the snow. My buddy said there was no way the kid had been dead for more than a few days, and even though he'd been missing for almost 3 months, the kid was curled around something, and when my buddy brushed off the snow to see what it was, he said he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a big chunk of ice that had been carved crudely to look sort of like a person. The kid was holding it so tight that it had frostbitten his chest and hands, which my buddy could tell even with the decay that had taken place. He radioed the rest of the crew, and they took the body off the mountain. Now, he recapped all of this for me, and to put it simply, there was no way this kid could have both survived for almost 3 months on his own, or have gotten to this peak. There was no physical way this child could have walked almost 50 miles and ended up at the top of a damn mountain. To top it off, there was nothing in the kid's stomach or colon. Nothing, not even water. It was like he said, the kid had been taken off the face of the earth, put in suspended animation, and dropped on this mountain months later, only to die of exposure. He's never really gotten over that one. The last story I'll share from him was the one that took place relatively recently, only a few months ago. They were out doing a recon for mountain lions because there had been several reports of sightings in the last couple of days. One of our jobs is to scout out the areas where these animals are seen to ensure that if they are in the area, we can warn people and close off those trails. He was out on his own in a very heavily forested part of the park toward dusk when he heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance. Now, as most of you know, when a mountain lion screams, it sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. It's unsettling, but far from abnormal. My buddy radioed back and let the ops know that he had heard one, and that he was going to keep going to see if he could figure out where its territory started. He heard the mountain lion scream a couple more times, always the same spot, and determined the approximate area of the mountain lion's territory. He was about to head back when he heard another scream, this time only within a few yards of him. Of course, he freaks out and starts heading back at a much faster pace, because the last thing he wants is to run into a damn mountain lion and get mauled to death. As he got back on the path and started heading back, the screaming followed him, and he broke into a jog. He was about a mile from Ops, and the screaming had stopped, and he turned around to see if it was following him. It was almost night by this point, but he said in the distance, just before the path rounded the corner, he could see what looked like a male figure. He called out to them, warning them that the paths were closed and that he needed to come back to the welcome center. The figure just stood there, and my buddy started to walk over. When he was about 10 yards away, the figure took, as he described, an impossibly long step toward him and let out the same scream my buddy had been hearing. My buddy didn't even say anything. He just turned and sprinted back to the Ops, never looking behind him. By the time he got back, the screaming had moved back into the woods. He didn't mention it to anyone else. He just said that there was a mountain lion in the area and that they would need to close those paths until the animal could be located and moved. I'm going to end this entry here since it's turned into a huge wall of text. I'm going to be heading out on a yearly training op tomorrow morning, so I'll be gone until early next week. I'll be meeting with a lot of former trainers and buddies who work in other areas of the park, and I'll be asking around about any stories they'd like to share. I'm so glad you guys have been interested in my stories, and once I'm back from this, I'll continue to share them with you.
Our grade school playground was very nice and isolated. The school itself was surrounded by around 7 or 8 acres of forest. It meant that the supervisors had to be extra vigilant to make sure no kids wandered off when they were supposed to. Me and my 2 other friends were known for giving the supervisors fits because we loved to go right to the edge, right up against the tree line. I can remember they were always yelling at us. We never did actually go into the woods though. But I guess the average adult, whose job depended on keeping us out, it looked like they were going into the woods as soon as somebody turned their heads. Maybe it was the 3 of us that were the sole reason the school decided a chain link fence 40 feet in front of the tree line, all around the edges of the playground. It was a good thing they did, because soon after construction, a number of supervisors seemed to retire. The fence was actually the only thing corralling us. There were still 1 or 2 supervisors, but they couldn't possibly keep tabs on us all at once. Quick note, it might sound weird me referring to teachers and aides as supervisors, but it's what I call them. It made us feel more relaxed about playing at the edge of the forest, because now, there's a fence to make sure we could not go further. We hoped that meant the adults would leave us alone, which it did. One recess, like any other. We were the only 3 in the back 40 of the playground. We were just being ourselves when a very strange, very unpleasant feeling came over us. I looked at my other friends, and their expressions announced that they were feeling the same thing. I wondered if it was something my parents had mentioned. I didn't understand how it worked. You know, food poisoning. But apparently, there's a chance that anything you ate could make you sick. And somehow, I knew that the strange shape on the other side of the fence was what was making all 3 of us feel funny. What I saw, it looked like a deer trying to be a person. It had shaggy skin that still had fur attached to it. It looked like it had been taken from a roadkill. This thing was standing on its hind legs and gently tapping the hooves of its forelegs together a soft but hypnotic-like beat. I can vividly remember my instincts telling me to run, and I shouted to my other friends to do the same. That my shout. I looked behind me to see that the other was still standing there, staring at this thing. I tried to yell back to him to follow us, but again, I had trouble raising my voice. We had gotten back to the school where most of the kids played in the basketball court. And even though we had just eaten and had full stomachs, both of us tired of the notion actually occurred to me to go inside and ask if we could have a second lunch. I was going to voice my idea. When it was time to line up, we let one of the supervisors know that our friend It turned out that our friend had gone missing, which I didn't understand how that could happen. There were no holes or openings in the fence, but it certainly made a huge issue with all the teachers. But he was gone, and no matter how the school searched, nothing was happening. All of us, much of us were close to him. They merely took our statements as a joke and told us to stop fooling around. I believe they even did a full search of the forest around. They found nothing. We went on. Well, life moved on. Junior high, high school, college, you know. We just learned to live with a tragedy like that. Looking back at things and how the Earth is, and how supposed reptilians exist, and other cryptids, I wouldn't be surprised if he was taken. My brother and some of his buddies were out hunting one time when they saw something they swear wasn't right. They claimed it was supernatural or something. They'd been hunting deer and found some exciting tracks that they wanted to follow, although they couldn't quite make out what the footprints were. And there were 3 of them, all fairly experienced hunters in their own right. As they followed these tracks, they noticed that these were not only animal tracks, but bipedal humanoid tracks. Thinking that they were hot on Bigfoot's trail, that's when they started to smell a really funky smell. And they were used to finding remains of animals out in the woods, victims of other hunters who hadn't cleared up their mess. But this smell they described to me was far worse. It was like death and rot, and all the worst things in the world that could have gone off at once. The one described it as garbage, like sitting out in the hot sun. One of his friends suggested they head back. No animal was worth this. They all kind of assumed at this point this was for sure Bigfoot. But my brother insisted that he wanted to kill himself with Bigfoot. He said he felt drawn to it, like it was pulling him. They heard some rustling ahead as the stench intensified. They drew back into the cover of some bushes as to not be seen and spooked. Then they saw this thing in person. The first thing he said they noticed was that this thing stood up tall. Extremely tall. It did indeed have feet similar to a deer, with little cloven hooves at the end of its arms, or hands should have been, which would explain the tracks they were following. Even though this thing seemed to shapeshift almost, what they thought they were following was a Bigfoot, was indeed something else entirely. This wasn't a buck, nor was it a Bigfoot. It looked like some sort of weird mutation between the two. Its body, while looking humanoid, had a very different head and face. It almost seemed to even have small little spikes, kind of like antlers. All of them completely frozen, not exactly sure what they were seeing. My brother shot a bullet, and they all took off running, as it charged them like a barreling grizzly bear. They still have no idea what exactly it was and what they saw. My brother's only real regret was running away, and not staying to kill this thing and see it.